Hey everyone, what's up? It's Ellie here. At Developer Direct this year, an event presented by Xbox and Bethesda, Arcane Studios has dropped another bombshell reveal for Redfall, and I just couldn't help myself but pick it apart to find as much info as I could. I hope you enjoy. We start with this artwork of a lighthouse, surrounded by a wall of water and a coven of vampires holding the town of Redfall hostage, the eclipse shading the town in an ominous shade of red, giving a whole new layer of meaning to the town's namesake. One thing I was particularly excited about with this release of info and gameplay was the explanation of how other residents of Redfall came into the picture with our playable characters. Of course, there are people who didn't escape the wrath of the vampires or decided to bend the knee, but what about those who slipped away through the shadows and cracks to safety? Apart from our 4 playable protagonists, I'm happy to report that in this gameplay reveal we see the faces and hear the voices of survivors who we will work together with to restore Redfall to the town it once was. This starts right from the beginning. A female survivor with a southern twang sets the tone for the beginning of the reveal. Firstly, I've noticed a few dead horses during this reveal. The way that this particular horse is strung up makes me wonder whether this was the work of vampires or their human thralls. Horse blood potentially being useful for some sort of ritual, or perhaps just a way to obtain surplus blood for the writings on the wall. We don't see many animals in Arcane Studios games, well, at least alive. I'm doubtful we'll see any horses alive, but we do see a few signs of life in Redfall outside of humans, of which we'll see soon. As we follow the path of death and destruction, we'll see some artwork of a survivor with a pair of sleeping children. She holds her gun tightly, awaiting for what would be the inevitable. But there's only so long you can go without giving in to your exhaustion. Unfortunately for this small family, it was very much at the wrong time. Here we have a group of bodies who've been wrapped up and left behind. The flowers covering their bodies suggest the survivors of whatever tragedy struck tried their best to keep their loved ones respectfully covered with loving goodbyes. Really erupts a familiar feeling in me, much like the wrapped bodies of the families throughout Dunwall, those who fell victim to the plague that stole so much life. The reveal slips back and forth between artwork and in-game visuals for the last time, painting a picture of our 4 protagonists standing with the last citizens of Redfall while a strong vampire floats overhead. And here we go, right into the gameplay from the perspective of Devinder, using his arc javelin, Layla throwing out her umbrella energy shield, and Devinder then running and sliding towards a human enemy, taking them down with a shotgun. A quick little intro into the combat of Redfall before it is taken over by the studio director of Arcane Austin, Harvey Smith. We're looking at a dimly lit board covered with a broad map of Redfall. I believe we'll see boards like this at the various safe houses scattered around Redfall, as we'll get into a little bit later. We see some sticky notes that read, "Reviewed devs footage, that can't be real." Another one that says, "Also reviewed footage, what was that? Doesn't make," which I assume is supposed to be doesn't make sense, but it just gets cut off for whatever reason. And lastly, oh hell no, absolutely not. Then there's a page of Devinder's field notes detailing the imagery of the bell seen everywhere. We've definitely already seen this imagery scattered around Redfall in the previous trailers. My guess is that this board is in a location that can really only be accessed by the main group, just based on the sticky note conversations, but in community safe houses, more commentary like this could be shared on the board for some interesting glimpses into the perspectives and lives of the other people of Redfall. The pictures of Redfall scattered around the map could help give players an idea visually of where these specific locations are, which are probably key areas we'll be exploring and completing objectives. And the last little detail I want to point out here is the fact that Harvey's favourite vampire hunter is Blade. I believe they are referring to the comic book character from the Marvel Universe. Here we get an overhead view of this dock area, where we can see how the lack of water has created so many hidden nooks and pathways in this particular location. I can definitely see these players expecting to see some sort of hidden loot or lore tucked away under the docks or getting creative with their stealthy pathways. Then we snap into the perspective of Jacob as the team rush into a butterfly house. Now, I did a bit of searching on this one because I love trying to line up whether the places and buildings in this game are actually references to real places in Massachusetts, as you would know if you watched my previous gameplay trailer analysis, but I couldn't specifically match up this building with anywhere in particular. However, there are a number of wonderful butterfly houses in this state, like a lot of them, and they're all quite significant. So the building itself may not be a direct reference unless I've missed something. However, maybe small features in the design could be. It's definitely something that has been added to the game because it is relevant to the area. Another thing about butterflies is that they so obviously signify change and transformation, which is definitely the goal of all sides in this narrative, even if their end goals are drastically different. I also love that despite Redfall being in such a state of chaos and despair, we still have a kaleidoscope of butterflies together hovering above this building. Also, if no one cosplays this particular vampire, I'm gonna be mad. Look at that beautiful yet terrifying halo. Harvey Smith yet again details Redfall as a story-driven shooter which can be played single-player or co-op with up to 4 players. And we actually get to see the Choose Our Hero pages where we get a short detail of each of our 4 playable characters and get a glimpse into their 3 main abilities. First off, we take a look at Jacob Boyer, the Deadeye with an undead eye. I'm definitely gonna be doing a in-depth look at each of the protagonists in a future video, but to go over what we see here, we get a quick look at what is in store for Jacob mains. Raven. We see that Jacob works with a raven from the very beginning. The ghostly raven seems to have a few uses such as locating and tagging enemies, as well as in a previous trailer being used as a distraction for enemies. Then there is Cloak, which we've seen a few times alongside Jacob's line, which is either ghosting out or bugging out, depends on the trailer. I think the line must alternate, in which Jacob seems to become completely invisible for a temporary amount of time, potentially something we can upgrade in the future. Jacob was a Special Forces sniper who turned to private contracts working with Bellwether Security, so stealth combat and intel is definitely his domain. Quickly confirmed in this description is the origins of Jacob's powers and his spectral companion, which happened when he had an encounter with one of the vampire gods during a contracted gig. The last ability shown here is Heartstopper. Now, I don't think we have a full description of what this ability of Jacob's is exactly, but I'm thinking it could be a lock-on headshot of some sort, but we may actually get a look at what this ability is a bit later on in the trailer. Secondly, we have Layla Ellison, the telekinetic threat in Student Debt. Her bio mentions her volunteering at Avum Therapeutics, where an incident left her with a killer headache and telekinetic powers. Now, we've seen these 2 abilities from Layla again from the very beginning. As we know, Layla has a spectral elevator that lifts players into the air to get to hard-to-get places or to avoid attacks and damage. Then we have Layla's umbrella ability, which shields allies, and with an upgrade harnesses the energy from enemy attacks and throws it back towards them, either eliminating, damaging, or staggering them for a moment. However, there is a third power here known as the Vampire Ex-Boyfriend. Honestly, I don't think I could begin to accurately guess what this power may be. Perhaps her manipulation of energy could momentarily affect actual enemies. Maybe it's a fear ability to make the enemies run the other direction while you or a teammate take a moment. Or maybe it's some sort of possession where temporarily an enemy actually rages against other vampires or other enemies. I'm definitely interested to see what this one could be. Layla definitely seems like an incredibly helpful support character. Perhaps even overpowered, especially if a whole team can play as the same character. Which actually gets me wondering, I wonder if you can stack the elevator lifts. Devinder Crossley is described as an internet-famous cryptid hunter and ghost hunter from the UK. He was visiting Redfall promoting his latest book when disaster struck. I think it's particularly fitting that Devinder was writing about the Mothman. Obviously, my first thought goes straight to the Bethesda Game Studios Fallout 76 reference of the Mothman, based in West Virginia and featuring Point Pleasant itself. It does make sense that Devinder was in Redfall at the time because he may have just been travelling down the east coast of the US, very likely making his way down south towards the legendary location and the birthplace of one of the most captivating cryptids. This was for sure a purposeful reference, knowing that this is a cryptid that the Bethesdaverse already know, love, and fear. Massachusetts does have its own history with cryptid lore though, the Dover Demon being described to have a large watermelon-shaped head and illuminated eyes. It had long, thin arms and legs, with slender fingers, and was also described as hairless with rough grey-toned skin. Kind of sounds like a vampire, right? I think Devinder has gotten a lot more than he has bargained for in the world of cryptology, though I think if there's anyone that should be trapped in Redfall, Dev is certainly a good choice. So let's take a look at his abilities. Devinder has fashioned some seemingly quite eccentric inventions, but as we've seen in the gameplay revealed so far, they are not to be underestimated. The arc javelin is a projectile weapon that when thrown towards enemies can either impale and eliminate them, or be used as a stun when thrown at the ground towards enemies, as we've seen in the trailers. The translocate power we briefly saw for the first time in the last gameplay reveal too. The third ability we have is Blacklight, which is essentially the "you shall not pass" of the Arcane universe. This high-tech staff emits UV light which petrifies the vampires for a temporary period of time, making them easy targets. I think Devinder's abilities are the only abilities that we have fully seen to the point of confidence of what they are. And lastly, but certainly not least, Remy de la Rosa. Remy is a combat engineer who has dedicated her life to rescuing people from disaster zones. Remy and Bribon trained Coast Guard personnel in Redfall prior to the attack, and I think her abilities definitely reflect her as a person. Firstly, we have a C4 charge. We've seen this used before. Paired with Lift, it's a great little combo. Secondly, Bribon has a siren function, which they use to distract enemies to more easily pick them off. We have a look at this for the first time in this reveal. I'm unsure if Bribon is still being used as a portable turret as they seem to in the very first trailer, or how much Bribon will actually be involved in combat apart from the use of this ability. Mobilize is the last ability. We get a quick glimpse of this ability later in the reveal. I believe that this is a quick healing AoE to help bring everyone back together and get ready for the next move. We've got this awesome scene right here which must be either in a nest or in a pocket of supernatural activity. And look, if Deathloop is in the same universe as Dishonored, then surely Redfall is as well. I mean, this scene is totally void-like. You can also see a little bit of Avon property right there, and some computers towards the back. I wonder what scattered pieces of information exists in this rift between reality and, well, something else. There's also a couple of what look like usable health packs floating over there. Very handy. And here we see more stake action, and a quick look at one of the neighbourhoods. We also catch another glimpse of a church that we've seen previously, as creative director Ricardo Bear takes over the narration. Under his name, it says that Ricardo's favourite vampire, rather than vampire hunter, is Nandor the Relentless. This character is from the film What We Do in the Shadows. We've also seen this structure before. It's just a little neatened up, and only small changes seem to really have been made to it. We move on to the fairgrounds where my eyes instantly shifted to these glowing pictures on the wall here. Perhaps they have some sort of helpful information for us. And this here is just a really gruesome scene at the end of the explorable Redfall. The only thing that mainly catches my eye in this scene are just some of these projectiles lodged into the animal on the left. It looks like that they can be retrieved as usable ammunition. Then we get this bird's eye view of a section of Redfall. This game has been described as their largest explorable setting yet, and I think that really shows. There is quite a lot going on in what is probably only considered a single neighbourhood of Redfalls. The game's also completely open world, which is actually quite exciting as Dishonored and Deathloop were both games that had large explorable areas but were cut up into levels for the player to move through over time. In fact, the only thing that I've heard is that Redfall is separated into two distinct districts. I'm not sure if that's changed since then because I don't think that was mentioned, but two districts is still a lot less division than previous Arcane games. Ricardo goes on to say that every inch of this world is carefully handcrafted and packed with environmental storytelling. This is definitely what we want, and essentially expected in an Arcane game. When I saw this arcade machine on the left, I got excited for the reference before my brain could even read the words, particularly because of how many arcade machine references there were in Deathloop recently. However, it wasn't so much a reference directly to a particular game by the looks of it, but more that the name Immersive Kim seems to be a play on the words immersive sim. So I wonder if there are any others, particularly because we have the fairground scene. We still see this theme of it being fall in Redfall, with the use of pumpkins and corn stalks scattered around the town. The game was originally set to release in summer and then in fall of 2022, which would have lined up with the Halloween vibe. But due to delays, the game has now been announced for May the 2nd, 2023, which actually means that the calendars in the game that we saw in the gameplay reveals prior had to be changed over to 2023, which we do see in this reveal. Here we have this bent over structure built onto a crane, the crane holding up what looks like a doorway from a building. The door is closed and it's glowing, some birds circling overhead. To me, this definitely looks like an entry point to a nest that we're definitely going to need Layla's lift or Devinder's translocator ability, or both, to reach this thing. And now we're getting into my favourite part of this reveal. In Redfall, there are going to be safe places on the island where our characters can rest up and chat with survivors. As we can see here, Jacob is observing this board fitted with pictures and sticky notes, much like the dimly lit one we saw before. We take a look inside the Redfall Maritime Centre, where we get a sneak peek at some survivors we'll meet. With the little write-ups like this one here about Redfall's wildlife and its struggles with litter, I think these will be, for sure, some great places to learn about Redfall's current state, but also its past. What was Redfall like before this disaster? There's another safe house revealed, the local fire station. And then we see this board that Jacob was observing previously. On this board you can very clearly observe 2 districts and a range of various notes, like where possible supplies are and other possible objectives. For example, a survivor gives us an objective, turning the old lighthouse in the bay back on as a warning to anyone attempting to get to Redfall. However, the lighthouse keeper has joined up with the cultists and has taken the lamp with them, which means that we need to locate them and get it back to turn the lighthouse back on. So into the action we go. From the perspective of Jacob, he uses his raven to mark out the enemies in an area undetected, highlighting each enemy in a red glowing outline. The cloaking delays the enemy spotting him. Jacob is then left to face off with a vampire known as the Shroud, who blankets the area in darkness to disorient their prey. They also throw lethal projectiles and are able to shift through the floor to avoid damage from the player. We can also see at this point a clear weak spot. Lining up a shot straight into the vampire's chest brings the vampire to a fiery end. We also see here just how dark spaces can be, with Jacob switching on a torch to get some visual on the space, which just makes it way more ominous. On the shelf on the left here, there seems to be a squirrel in this old pilgrimy attire. It had this shiny glow before the torch lined up to it, which could indicate that it's some sort of collectible. Maybe it's something that we can interact with at some capacity. Also, we get to see that mirrors actually seem to work in this game too. We catch a quick glimpse of Jacob's gun in the mirror there. So Jacob is just traversing through this super ominous pitch black house, and it really gives us a sense of how horror plays into Redfall. This would be totally terrifying for me, quite honestly. I am not a big horror games person. Walking through this dark, ominous house with a suspicious lack of sound or activity, this is definitely working itself up to be a jump scare. Jacob breaks through the wooden boards to this room that has a few mystically glowing lamps scattered around, the lighthouse bulb right in front on the desk. But of course, as soon as Jacob retrieves the bulb and turns around, yep, a fight ensues. During a bit of chase, we actually do get to see one of those updated calendars with the 2023 on them for a split moment here, and then Jacob gets the kill, absorbing more of those bluey orbs that come from the vamps we've seen previously. Jacob moves on to returning the bulb to the lighthouse using his cloak to get past the first vamp. It actually does seem to make him completely invisible. However, there is no avoiding a fight really, because once Jacob restores the lighthouse, the angered vampire gods send an enemy called the Rook down, who looks absolutely terrifying. I'll take a moment to say that before this reveal, I was worried there wasn't going to be much differentiation between the vampires and other enemies. I still won't really know until I jump into the game, but as I said earlier, I particularly enjoyed the introduction of more non-hostile characters. I also love that there seems to be a somewhat more unique cast of enemies showcased here, along with defining names that we haven't heard before. It just makes me more excited for that combat. Harvey Smith takes over the narration again and discusses how Redfall is filled with encounters that can pop up anywhere. In this scenario, the player can save the locals from being offered to the vampires. Showing off a silenced pistol, Harvey explains that like their past games, you can approach a mission in many different ways. Remy sneaks up to a group of enemies and uses Bond to distract them with the siren ability. Though it does sound a little loud and it's not exactly a full stealth low chaos play, there doesn't seem to be any other alerted enemies on the other side of the wall, and Remy continues to stealth her way in. Now, again, I have said this before, and I will say it again. Why in an arcane game are we seeing ladders? I am absolutely shocked that we now have seen 2 ladders in this game, despite the fact that we have 2 characters that have massive movement abilities, including what is essentially a blink ability. I suppose this is to ensure accessibility for the characters like Remy and Jacob who don't have access to those, but surely there's a way that these characters can navigate vertical spaces that doesn't include breaking one of the original pillars of Arcane. At the very least, it seems like a quick, effortless movement, and maybe it's not very common at all, or maybe it's completely optional. It did very much stump me though. So here we come across some bodies, retrievable projectiles on the left as we've seen before, and a cultist bag that we can open and find a semi-automatic shotgun called the Causeway. It has a level of 15 and seems to have a coloured tier level in blue. There's also these bars down here and the word superior, which may signify the quality of the gun. Perhaps they need to break down in quality after use, or they need to be repaired or potentially can be upgraded to increase the stat. As we can see at the bottom here, we can press Y to scrap, and there's also a monetary value. We've seen this info for different weapons before. It's mostly similar to what we've already seen. However, where this coin value is used to be an indicator of something called support value with a different icon. We can also see how there will be green and red indicators that will compare the weapon and the player's currently equipped weapon, which I think is extremely helpful. There are also some unique attributes. Moving onwards, Remy finds a spot in the roof that allows her to attack from above in a stealthy manner, and get a better look at what's happening inside the building. My eyes are quite quickly drawn to the puddle of what looks like shimmering oil on the floor below, and the quite precariously placed bottles of gas and open flames just above, but Remy avoids this play to stay low key and takes them out with a silenced headshot. Unfortunately, she doesn't notice the blood bag enemy directly below them that quite literally blows her cover, and she's forced to use the dramatic explosion to quickly take out the next one that rushes up the stairs. Weirdly, it doesn't seem that the enemies below are even bothered by the commotion and only care when Remy takes her next shots and jumps down. It's a little concerning, but I feel like most reveals are played on what is the lowest difficulty to ensure the smoothest plays possible, so until I actually get my hands on this game, I'm not going to judge the reactivity of the enemies too harshly. Next up, Harvey speaks more about the otherworldly psychic spaces in Redfall, otherwise known as nests, made up from the collective consciousness of vampires, and how we can use these spaces to help us unravel the vampire's secrets. These nests are different each time, as which area they manipulate probably depends on where they're entered from. Nests are these super strange manipulations of Redfall that seem to be on a whole other plane of existence, much like the Upside Down in Stranger Things. Players have limited time in these nests, but to destroy one, you have to take out its heart and all of the vampires inside. It actually kind of gives me Oblivion Gate vibes. The player can collect nest remnants. Taking it back to the last gameplay reveal, we know that there are 3 types of remnants you can get from a nest: blood remnants, ward remnants, and soul remnants. These act similarly to runes and bone charms in Dishonored or trinkets in Deathloop. They can be health, defense, or weapon related to modify gameplay. My curiosity lies in whether they will be unique for each player, limited to one player, or the same and shareable between all players. This one is a blood remnant, which is a sample of vampire blood infused with psychic energy. This remnant specifically increases the max health of the player. When the heart is destroyed, you'll need to collect the remnant and escape before the nest collapses. But as well as these nests, there are still pockets of psychic spaces, just like the place we saw earlier with all the furniture flying around in the purple hue. Also, the forest here looks so dang. I'm not sure how much we'll be able to walk around and explore it, but it looks crazy interesting. There's also another run-in with the vampire called the Angler from the very first trailer, who uses a psychic harpoon to isolate its prey. We're introduced to a third narrator, Susan Caff, who is the business director of Arcane Austin. Their listed favourite is a vampire song, which is a song called Living Dead Girl, of which I assume is the song by Rob Zombie. It is another thing that I particularly like about this reveal. Each of the Arcane team who has been introduced has shown something that they particularly enjoy in the world of fictional vampires. It's an emphasis on the fact that the Arcane team are inspired by so many facets of popular culture, and I'm sure that this means that we're going to see so many of their influences in-game. So potentially some really cool Easter eggs too. Susan mentions that as well as following the main storyline, another objective is to take back Redfall neighbourhood by neighbourhood. That Redfall won't truly be safe until all the vampires are wiped from the map. This means that there will be plenty of side quests, and perhaps even after the main story is complete, we will be free to continue to work to restore Redfall and clear out the remaining vampires. Here there's a little house spray painted on some basement doors to indicate to the player that they have found a safe house, or maybe that there is one nearby. When we do get a look inside this safe house, there is another form of map, They definitely all seem very different and are pointing out different things. This one doesn't look like you can interact with it, but it looks a lot smaller scale and probably points out very specific things within the neighborhood that can help us strategize. You can also see quick pointers like the word sniper at the bottom here, giving the player a heads up at a possible threat. Each neighborhood has a vampire that is controlling that neighborhood, the underboss. Powerful elites of the vampire gods with their own unique abilities. In this neighborhood, the vampire in control is called the Siphon. We once again get a look at our skill trees. This time, rather than Devinda, we get a look at Layla's. We can clearly see pathways for all three of her abilities, Umbrella, Lift, and Vampire Ex-Boyfriend. But then there's also another three that aren't as in-depth. These are common across all characters, as we can compare them to Devinda's in the last gameplay reveal. Then we have the four across the top, which I believe are also unique to each hero. The skill we get a glimpse of here is One More Floor, worth 2 skill points. It allows Layla to lift people higher into the air. The next upgrade is Bullet Hail, which allows her Umbrella ability to actually absorb energy from enemy bullets and release the energy back at them. When the Siphon is destroyed, they and the creepy tree base that they've created for themselves dissolves into flames. We also get a look at Jacob's skill tree, and again we see those 3 same common upgrades on the right. The upgrades we get a glimpse at here are the extended magazine, which means that the ability Heartstopper lasts longer and has more ammunition. This in itself gives us a little clue as to what Heartstopper actually is as an ability, but we do finally get to see the ability being used shortly after. Each enemy's head is highlighted and it looks like the player's aim locks on as some rapid full power sniping ensues. Next up, we get another look at Devinda's skill tree, taking a look at the ultra-violent light upgrade for the ability Blacklight, which gives Blacklight a longer lasting effect and a larger radius. It also means that when the Blacklight expires, it violently explodes, which shatters petrified vampires, which is just about what we've seen previously when this ability was in action. The subject of weapons and weapon cosmetics is touched on next. Redfall will be home to many variations of weapons to make each player's experience unique. We'll see another example of a player using a car to damage a group of enemies, before switching back to a loadout screen showing off all the different stake mods that you can attach to your weapon. Then switching to look at the name and stats of this burst fire assault rifle named Morrigan, which is a name that is referenced in a few pieces of popular culture, but all seem to stem back to the name of a warrior queen goddess in Irish Celtic mythology, associated with inciting war and being the bringer of death, which I suppose is quite a relevant name for an assault rifle. The vampire stake selected for this gun is the end of an electric guitar, which is just so rock and roll really. A small map pulled out by the player shows some key locations in Redfall's tourism sector. This could indicate some of the various neighbourhoods you'll need to reclaim, or just places of interest to investigate within a neighbourhood. Doesn't seem to be too particularly detailed. Each of these underbosses look quite interesting and unique. I look forward to investigating each one and learning potentially more about how they came to be. They all seem to be uniquely designed with special abilities that are uniquely challenging. When an underboss is defeated, the players are rewarded with a key. This key will get you a step closer to facing the ultimate threat, the vampire gods. On this pedestal, you can see that placing the skull unlocks a new potential key slot in the shape of a bell. When the items needed are placed and ready to go, it looks like it just opens up the creepy red portal and sends you right through to the final bosses of the game. These behemoth-sized vampire gods look absolutely terrifying, but we don't get to see too much of them before the reveal begins to wrap up. The showcase ends with a few more snippets of gameplay and combat with various enemies. This really cool effigy, this spider-like vampire underboss in which looks like a conservatory/butterfly house, and a fight with some cultists at the edge of the world. This really weird and creepy thing, some more angler, and then we end on the rook. And finally, we get our solid date for the release of Redfall, the 2nd of May 2023. How exciting! I think there was quite a lot to unpack in that reveal, and I'm definitely still looking into it as much as I can to learn more. I hope you enjoyed my little pull apart of this reveal, and if you did, please consider leaving a like and maybe even a super thanks. Thank you everyone for watching, and I plan on making a whole lot more Redfall content in the coming months leading up to the release, so please make sure that you're subscribed to keep up. I'll see you next time. Bye!